And good afternoon to you, everybody. Welcome to the Pat Miller Program here on this Saturday. Very glad that you're with us here today on August 24th. And this is the time of year when football season gets started. We've had games all across the area that got kicked off last night. I know some of you went out and saw your favorite teams. Some of you were happy, some of you not so much. But you can catch all that on our sports station at 1380, and we'll be there to cover all of that. But let's get to some of the things on our mind. This week was Democratic National Convention Week. I know you're aware of that. Some of the quotes that came out from people who were not necessarily keynote speakers, but things that were said. For example, from Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. She said, "We have to defeat a person who is a threat to our democracy of the kind we have not seen." Well, first of all, Ms. Pelosi, that's not really quite a true statement, is it? I mean, the guy that you're talking about that you have to defeat, Donald Trump, he is somebody that we've seen. We've seen him because he was the president before this one. Is that not true? She said, we have to defeat a person who is a threat to our democracy, the kind we have not seen. At the beginning of our country, Thomas Paine said that times have found us. Declare war, establish a new nation. Abraham Lincoln took up that charge to keep our country together years later, decades later, and now the times have found us to save our democracy. Save it from who? Who has been in the White House for the last 4 years, Ms. Pelosi? When gas prices have gone up astronomically, the cost of food has gone up. Many people can't afford the houses that they're already in. The threat of wars around the world have sprung up in the last 4 years. Who held the White House then, Ms. Pelosi? Was it not your guy, Joe Biden? Now, I get it that we're turning a whole new chapter. I'm a little amused by the fact that Kamala Harris pounds the little political pulpit and tells us it's time to start anew. It's time to grab the reins and start over from whom? You're not starting over from Donald Trump. Your guy did that. When your guy, Joe Biden, went into office, he immediately started railing against the positions of Donald Trump and began to change things. Executive orders. Forget Congress. Executive orders. Let's stop the border wall. Let's open up things. Let's let several million come in who have no business being here. Let's do that. Is that what you're talking about, Ms. Pelosi? Is that keeping the country together? Is that how we're doing it? I'm not sure that he is the Thomas Paine of today. And she, Kamala Harris, is definitely not that person. On January the 20th, 2021, Ms. Pelosi says, with the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we established one of the most successful presidencies of modern times. When, where, and how? When, where, and how is that true, Ms. Pelosi? I mean, do you honestly, deep down in your hearts, folks, do you believe that? That in 2021, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took the oaths of office, that we established one of the most successful presidencies of modern times? And if that tandem of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was so successful, why is it that she refuses to go back and talk about the great accomplishments of that administration? Why is it that she keeps saying we have to turn the page? Why is it they keep saying we have to grab the reins of democracy and pull it back where it belongs? Why is that? Why is that? What is it that has to be done? I'm a little concerned that maybe Ms. Harris is confused with what it was that happened for the 4 years before Joe Biden became president. Hakeem Jeffries, who's the House Minority Leader, said we could not have asked for a better leader to partner with than President Joseph Robinette Biden, who will go down as one of the most consequential presidents of all time. Well, he's partially right. He is going to be consequential. He's not going to be noted as being one of the most successful, but he will be consequential. There's a big difference there, a large difference there. I'm just amazed at what it is that people are willing to say to keep their party in power so they can do whatever it is that they want, can, and should do. Tim Walz, who of course is the Democratic VP nominee, he said, Republicans will start jacking up the cost on the middle class. If that were true, Mr. Walz, Why didn't he do that when he was in the White House? Why didn't that happen then? It occurs to me that the jacking up for the Miller household on the cost of gas, including the cost of gas for heating and cooling my home, the cost of groceries, it started jacking up 3.5 years ago. Why is that? Now, here's what they're doing. They're just throwing stuff up against the wall, and they're going to keep throwing it and keep throwing it and keep throwing it until you start believing it. Throw it up there, and eventually some people will believe it. I'm not going to believe it because it's not going to happen. Walls said, Kamala Harris is going to cut your taxes. I immediately looked out my window when I heard that to see if donkeys were flying. She's going to cut my taxes. Hakeem Jeffries, again, not to be left out of the conversation, said Kamala Harris and House Democrats will lower costs and grow the middle class. Kamala Harris and House Democrats will fix our broken immigration system and secure the border. Stop it and shut up. You're going to tell me the woman who for the last 3.5 years was named the border czar by the president and recognized by every major news media. If you hear a news person now say, well, they never said that she was the border czar, just do a Google search, whatever network that person is on, and go back and you'll see time after time after time where she was recognized as the border czar, saying Kamala Harris and House Democrats will fix our broken immigration system and secure the border. They never did. They made it easier for people. We could have done more if we had neon lit signs, billboards all along the roads in Mexico saying, hurry up, because if Donald Trump gets in, we're going to have to shut the border again. So get in here just as fast as you can. It's amazing to me. Jeffries went on to say that Kamala Harris and House Democrats will strengthen the relationship between the police and the community. You know, the people that called for defunding, the people that in certain circumstances have made police stand by and wait for things to get done, looting going on all around them, and they can't lift a finger because, well, you don't want to be seen as coming around and being the ones causing trouble for the people committing the crimes. They would rather throw the shop owners into jail because they try to defend their own property. If that's supporting the police and the community, and if that's what Kamala says she's going to do, you've got another thing coming. Absolutely another thing coming. For 20 years, this is Chris Murphy, Democrat senator from Connecticut. For 20 years, Kamala Harris has been tough as nails when it comes to securing the border. She can't even find the border. Find me one executive order, find me one piece of legislation that she suggested in Congress. Remember, she functions as the president of the Senate. Find me one where she has made moves, made legislation, encouraged legislators, encouraged the president to do things that would have made the border more secure. Democrat, Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto. She said, Kamala and I worked to protect our southern border. Again, Senator Masto, when and where? I so desperately want to believe you. When and where? Because I'm just telling you, I don't see it. I can't find it anywhere. I don't see where any of that happened. And not to be left out of all the discussion, Amy Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, she said, instead of the MAGA movement, we're going to start the MAMA movement, M-A-M-M-A. That is, Make America, Michigan, and Minnesota again. And the crowd just went wild and went crazy. Okay, go back to the things that happened under Mr. Walz, who was the governor of Minnesota at the time, and see all the disarray and disregard for citizens and business, and then you tell me that he was a great fighter for our borders. I don't buy it. Do you? More conversation about what was said this week and what was not said at the DNC, and it comes up straight ahead right here on the Pat Miller Program here on WOWO. Hey, welcome back to the second segment here on this Saturday of the Pat Miller Program. Glad you're with us, still with us. Remember, if you have comments or questions, you can write me when I'm on the air or when I'm gone, and that's Pat Miller, all one word, no dots or dashes, Pat Miller at WOWO.com. One of the interesting things I see here, as far as an opinion, is from two governors in the eastern part of our country. One from Governor Josh Shapiro, who was considered to be one of the finalists for the VP pick for Kamala Harris, but was not picked. Does anybody remember why? Does anybody remember what was the legislation that Shapiro did that was anti-American? What was it that he did that was wrong? Nothing. What he did was he had the audacity to be born a Jew. And Kamala Harris and her people did not want a Jew on the ticket because they felt like there was so much anti-Jewish sentiment going on across the country and around the world that they couldn't afford it. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro said it's not freedom to tell our children what books they're allowed to read. Now, he's making reference here to books that talk about sexuality and things like that. And if they want to read them, you need to let them. And this was allowing them to read them at very young ages. Do you remember when we used to have, when they first came out with the different ratings on movies? You had G, and then you had PG, and then it went to PG-13, and then we had R, and then we had RX. And now we probably have as many ratings as Heinz has varieties because we want to protect our children. You actually have in Hollywood now, you actually have some people adding certain things to certain films, not to make the rating more palatable, but to make it go up higher on the disgusting and sexual standard, because that's when you can really get the money, because mom and dad who pay the bills for going to the movies, that's the stuff they want to see. Well, he says it's not freedom to tell our children what books they're allowed to read. I have a question for you, Governor, and you've not said this. I think I probably know your answer. Is it freedom for the parents of children to tell them what books they're not allowed to read? Do you not, in most of your schools in Pennsylvania, not allow them in school to read the Bible or to read Christian-related books? Is that not true in Pittsburgh right now, sir? Is that not true in Philadelphia? So what you're saying is it's okay to tell them that they can't read something if it's something that falls into the realm of what you believe they should or should not be reading. Kathy Hochul, who, of course, is the governor of the state of New York. The guys, talking about men intentionally, the guys don't require any qualifications. They just step up and run. Women should not have to have the greatest resume in the world to get started in the game. In other words, if they want to jump in, let them jump in. Can I say this? That's true, Ms. Hochul. I agree with you on that standard. I really do. That standard is fine with me, to make it the same for all. But just be ready. Just be ready, because if the public doesn't like the candidate, they're still not going to like the candidate. And there's nothing that you can see that's really going to make any difference to what it is that they're doing. I think that Democrats want people to vote for Harris not because of her resume. I think they want people to vote for Harris because of this vibe or this attitude, and not really think all that hard about what it would mean to implement the kind of policy agenda that she has mostly stood for through her whole career. They're not even looking at what she stood for through her whole career. And there's a lot of career to look at before she ever got to the White House as vice president. And there may not be a debate about who can be more joyful, but there has to be a debate about who can get the country back on the right track when 3/4 think it's off on the wrong track. And it's gotten on the wrong track during the administration of which she is a part. It's not the Joe Biden administration. It's the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris administration. When you stand behind the president as he's signing things and making policy and making law, that you can't later, when you're out there running on your own, shake your head and go, "Nuh-uh, was it me? That's not my administration. Nuh-uh, I wasn't the border czar." I love that one. They're still trying to make that claim. I wasn't the border czar. Who was? Look, either you were the border czar or you're telling me that there wasn't one. Now, if she becomes president of the United States, how would you like to be the person that's named the border czar? Because to be successful at the border, wouldn't you have to go in and undo things that Kamala did as vice president, or do things that she did not do as vice president? I mean, are you left with anything besides that? Tom Cotton asked a great question. Tom Cotton, one of my favorite senators, he's from the state of Arkansas. He says, if Kamala Harris has a plan to fix the mess she created, why hasn't she already done it? Why hasn't she already done it? One of the questions that I have that I want to tackle in the next section is if, in fact, Kamala Harris has been greatly successful and she's made her positions known. I mean, there are some quotes out there now, some different quick polls out there. In fact, on CNN, they released one yesterday that said if the election was today and if it was about policy, Donald Trump probably wins. I'll let you take a minute. Unplug your ears. Listen to me closely. If the election were today, and if it's about policy and not party, if it's not about the celebration, if it's about actual policy, Trump probably wins. That's got to make the hair on the back of Kamala's neck stand straight up, doesn't it? I'm going to talk about that in just a minute when we come back after our break at the bottom of the hour, because I think it's something that we need to look at and examine. And we'll look at what it is that happened. What happened, by the way, with Joe Biden? In the convention, not before, in the convention. He came out, he gave his speech. The place went crazy. They wouldn't stop applauding when he first came out. I think part of the thought was if we applaud loud and long, maybe, in fact, backstage they'll cut some of his speech off of his teleprompter, because if it's not on the teleprompter, he's not going to say it. But he came out and he pushed everything, and they applauded and they screeched. As soon as he gets off the stage, what happened to him? They got him to the airport, got him on a plane, and got him to California, where he started a vacation at a California mansion of one of his friends. And in my view, there's nothing wrong with that. Look, if you treat me like garbage like they did Joe Biden, I'm not saying Joe Biden should have stayed in office or on the ticket. But if you treat him the way they did, and you undermine him and you undercut him and you yank the pins out from under Joe Biden, I wouldn't want to hang around either. I'm just being honest. And if I've got a friend in California who's a multi-millionaire, and he says, come on out to San Ynez, and we'll put you up, and, you know, we've got the estate here, and everything's big, and the first family's staying there for free, and they're staying there at the place of billionaire donor Joe Kiani. Now, people are screaming, even Republicans, shut up. Just leave it alone. Let the Democrats explain why they got rid of Joe the way they did, and why he went where he went, and why he's no longer there. When she accepted on Thursday night the nomination by her party, it has generally been the pattern in a convention that if, in fact, the previous president, the one who's leaving office, and the one who is there to take the nomination to supplant that person in office, it's normally acceptable for the existing president to come out on stage one more time, basically tell his party goodbye, wrap his arms around the candidate, shake their hand, kiss him on the cheek, whatever's appropriate, and then say, hey, it's been awesome. Thanks so much. Bye-bye now. And he didn't get that. He was in the air within 2 hours of finishing his speech the other night. That's a little disconcerting to me. And I'm not a Joe Biden fan, but I think you treat people like people. More coming up straight ahead right here on Wobo 92.3 FM and 1190 AM. Very glad that you're back with us as we start into the second half hour of this Saturday. Thank you this Saturday, every Saturday. Thank you for the time that you spend with us. And for those of you that can, drop us an email. Tell us, I agree with what you said on this. I don't agree with what you said on that, because I don't believe that everybody that's out there listening to me agrees with everything I say. I don't get that at home. Why should I get that from you? No, but I think it makes us sharpen our thoughts. Why did I say that? Why did I think that? Why was that my position then? And would that be my position now? Now that I've read what you said to me. Most times I'm not going to move my position. Sometimes I do. Let me go to one of them. Let me go to Oprah Winfrey, who, of course, was a featured speaker at the DNC this week. She spoke to the Democratic National Convention. Look, Oprah is an icon. She is an American icon. She started with nothing. She started from a very poor beginning, which we've heard. Her estimated net worth, what I can find right now in all my sources, is somewhere around $3.2 billion. $3.2 billion. That makes her the wealthiest female celebrity in the United States. Now, there are females in the U.S. that are worth more, but they have last names like Walton or Mars, things like that. But as somebody who came from nothing and has done it in her field of study and in her field of work, as Oprah did, it's amazing. And she should be applauded for that. She created an empire that has her name on it. Well, in her speech Wednesday night, Oprah claimed that the Harris-Walz ticket would protect freedom and democracy and support people who work hard for the money. Why would she think that? You say, well, Pat, because she thinks that. Okay. Does she really think that? Does somebody who has the political acumen and the business acumen of an Oprah Winfrey truly, truly, truly believe that? She said, this election is about what we want our futures to look like. And she insisted that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz can give us decency and respect. Is she suggesting that under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that was not the case? Is that what she's saying? Sometimes some of the speeches this week almost made me think they were trying to overcome a Republican incumbent. Pretty little difficult. When you came onto the scene, Kamala, there in the shadows of Joe Biden, and you spent a lot of the first 6 months in office watching him sign executive orders or watch him sign bills that came from Congress that undid everything that President Trump had achieved, it's hard for me to imagine how it is now you stand up and you want to run as if you are the outsider running against the incumbent. The incumbent is your partner in crime, Joe Biden. Oprah emphasized about Harris's upbringing, Jamaican and Indian immigrants. She had plenty of ugly accusations about her former best buddy, Donald Trump, Oprah's best buddy, and encouraged the audience to vote for optimism, inclusion, truth, honor, and joy. Now, I want you to write those down. Optimism, inclusion, truth, honor, and joy. Why? Those are the latest buzzwords coming out of the Harris campaign. Let me say them one more time so you can be listening for them. Optimism, inclusion, truth, honor, and joy. I mean, these are lofty sentiments. Unfortunately, much of what Oprah Winfrey said on Wednesday night at this convention simply wasn't true. As the governor of Minnesota, Mr. Walz, took his time calling in the National Guard while sections of Minneapolis burned during the spring 2020 George Floyd riots. But Walz took his time calling them up, didn't want to call them up too soon. Had police patrols shooting Minneapolis residents with paintballs if they ventured out onto their front porches past curfew. They weren't out in the streets. They weren't carrying signs. They weren't yelling things at the police. They're sitting on their front porch, and so the police opened fire on them with paintballs. His wife commented that she left the windows open so she could enjoy the smell of burning fires. That made my blood run cold. To think that the wife of a governor, knowing that the governor is not calling out the National Guard and not putting an end to the George Floyd uprising, that she chooses to open the windows of the governor's mansion so she could enjoy the stench of burning fires. Another thing that the governor did was he started a snitch line. Snitch, I'm telling on you. I want to tell on you. A snitch line, so Minnesotans could report their neighbors violating lockdown rules, which prompted Reason magazine to call Walz a tyrant. Now, for her part, Harris promoted a fund to bail out criminals arrested for violence during the 2020 riots and argued in favor of defunding police forces. As a prosecutor, Harris incarcerated more than 1,000 black men for minor drug possession charges, despite the fact that she herself recreationally used marijuana. How do you justify that? How do you justify that? That makes no sense to me. Her role in the Biden administration's open border policy has been catastrophic. Remember, this is your border czar. Upwards of 10 million, let me say it again, 10 million illegal immigrants have crossed into this country under her tenure as the border czar, with increased illegal drug importation, record numbers of fentanyl poisoning deaths. Forget around the world, increased numbers here in our country. More than 320,000 unaccompanied migrant children lost, and staggering amounts of American taxpayer dollars. By all the figures I can find right now, it's somewhere around $150 to $160 billion a year, diverted from the needs of our citizens so that we can meet the rights of citizens who don't belong here. Just a quick question. Does that sound like freedom to you? This is the convention that was built on freedom. This doesn't sound like freedom to me. This sounds like they're trying to make me and my family more encumbered than ever before. Does it show respect for the business owners who lost their property and their livelihoods during the 2020 riots? Is it decent to allow countless children to fall into sex trafficking or subject Americans to crime and mayhem? Is it really what Americans want the future to look like? Look, even if you think Oprah's words were uplifting, the conclusions that she draws from them are absolutely wrong. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the words that she said that we need to look for, freedom, respect, decent. Again, let me ask you the questions. Does everything sound like freedom to you where we're losing $150 billion a year to take care of people coming in our country who should not be here, who should not be citizens, who certainly should not be voting for our future? Respect for business owners who, during things like the 2020 riots up there in the vice presidential candidate's home state as governor, where business owners lost their respect because they lost their property and their livelihoods? Is it decent to allow countless children to fall into sex trafficking or subject Americans to crime and mayhem? Oprah acknowledged that these are complicated times that require an adult conversation. But an adult conversation, are you listening, Miss Winfrey? I know you're not, but if you were, does an adult conversation about this presidential election mean there should be discussions about actual policies? And there was nothing about policy in what Oprah said, nor was there anything about policy in what Kamala Harris said all week long, or the weeks leading up to the convention when she knew she was going to be the candidate. Well, we'll talk more about this, other things going on as we move on to the last segment here of this first hour. Glad you're with us here on the Pat Miller Program. Always glad you're here with us every week. Remember, you can write me when I'm on the air or even after we're done, and that's real easy. Pat Miller, all one word, no dots or dashes. Pat Miller at wowo.com. We'll be back with more straight ahead right here on this Saturday. Glad you're with us here on WOWO. Hi there, faithful listeners. Welcome back. Glad you guys are here. Look, we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the things that we brought up in the first portions of the program, and we're going to do that now. We were talking about Oprah and the fact at the convention, the Democratic National Convention, that Oprah was one of the speakers. Now, can I just ask one other question? And this is not about Oprah and not about Biden and not about Kamala per se. When Joe Biden dropped out of the race, Kamala was the natural choice, and he picked her and he basically laid the mantle on her. Can I ask you a question? If, in fact, some people really start listening to what it is Kamala is saying or not saying, if people on the Democrat side start to get squeamish about their candidate, where do they go? Well, I'm going to tell you, I watched a lot of the people that were main speakers that were there and that spoke. One of them garnered my attention a great deal because I'm wondering, why is she there? In the next hour, I'm going to talk about What is the shadow that Mrs. Obama spread across this convention, and should that matter? Going back to Oprah Winfrey, Oprah said they're complicated times. We need an adult conversation. Look, you don't vote for Kamala Harris simply because she's female. Now, I'm not a sexist. I'm all for female candidates. I genuinely am. There were some female candidates on the Republican side that I had hoped that would end up being the presidential nominee or the VP nominee, but they weren't. We had one of them, the former governor of the state of South Carolina and a former ambassador to the United Nations, and I thought she was incredible in her speech. I'm hoping that she will make a better position known when it comes to what's happening relative to the movements forward of the Republicans. I really think that that's going to be a great deal, and we need to see a lot of that come to pass. But will she be that person? It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. But don't vote for Harris just because she's female. And don't vote for her parents just because they were immigrants. Look, it's an inspiring story. Absolutely. But it doesn't qualify her to be president. Voters have to understand a candidate's policies, and they have to evaluate a candidate's policies and say, that sounds right to me. Because we are, at the end of the day, we don't always act like it, but we are a nation governed by policy. Our businesses are regulated by policies. Our communities, Fort Wayne, New Haven, Huntertown, Columbia City, Warsaw, they are all regulated by policies. Our schools and the children that are in our schools are impacted by policies. So if that's true, then isn't that really what should matter? Not somebody's skin or what's their ethnicity or their sex or their family's country of origin? Now, don't get me wrong. If your parents came as immigrants and they established themselves here and you became an incredible American and you've shown yourself, that is a terrific story. But then that doesn't mean that everybody who is a woman who got here, whose parents got them here, and they are from outside the country, but you were born here, again, good story, doesn't automatically make you presidential material. Oprah isn't alone. Most of the speakers at the DNC that I heard this week have devoted their airtime to demonizing Donald Trump, but they avoided discussing the policies that came out of the Harris-Walz administration, or would come out of a Harris-Walz administration, except for one, abortion. Every time that word was said, the convention hall exploded. And part of the reason was because they knew their audience would agree with it. Look, it's not just at the convention where any discussion of policy has been absent. Harris has been the de facto nominee now for over a month. Over a month. She has held 0 press conferences. She has not given any interviews in that time. And her website contains no information, as of last night, no information about her policy. None. None. Also, there is word out there that she has decided not to meet Donald Trump on the Fox News campaign event, their little head-to-head, the only one that was on the schedule, and she has pulled out. I don't want to do it. I don't want to. What's going on here? What are you doing? I mean, beyond her past record, she's tossed out a few ideas about her ideas, some hints, but she suggested price controls for food, a proposal that even her supporters say that would create shortages, black markets, corporate collusion, and business collapse. Then there's her support for raising the corporate income tax to 28%. Now, Ms. Harris, I know that your degrees from college were not in business or economy, so let me help you for just a minute. If you jack up the tax 6%, 8% on corporate income, who will pay that increase? Those corporations would have to turn around and charge higher prices for their goods and their services. And they're doing it at a time when inflation has already sent prices skyrocketing. She wants much higher taxes on inherited property. That's a property. Are you listening to me? I know a lot of you listen to the Little Red Barn, and a lot of you follow a lot that our good farm director here at WOWO talks about. That would affect farm families more than anybody right out of the gate. Because if you're going to talk about higher taxes on inherited property, that will devastate family farms and family businesses. Then she's calling for a tax on unrealized gains. Now, do you have something that has an increased value? Okay, let's say that you've got a retirement fund, okay? You've got that in place. If you have gains on that, when you sell that property, you pay tax on it. How about this? She wants you to pay tax on unrealized gain. If you own increased value, you're expected to pay taxes on it, even if you haven't sold the property. You've got a 401k. You've got some kind of investment, and yeah, the value's growing, but you haven't sold it. You haven't been exposed to any of the increase personally. It's out there, but you haven't dipped into it. If you dip into it, then you pay the tax. She wants you to pay tax on it now. That would be an absolute disaster for small and medium businesses, most of which don't have huge amounts of cash on hand. How about it, farmers? If you have a big disaster on your farm, aren't you always worried that that might be the one that'll wipe you out? Are you expecting it to be unrealized growth of the value of your farm and you should be taxed on it immediately? You'd have to sell the business. And who would be able to buy all these struggling businesses? How about multinational corporations and the wealthiest individuals? And this isn't to mention the lobbying that big corporations can pay to carve out exemptions for themselves, which most businesses cannot afford. Harris and Walz, their whole campaign, they're banking on spending the next 70 days or so playing three-card Monte with the American public, using identity politics, mean tweets, mawkish sentimentality, because they know full well that if the voters truly understood the policies of the Harris-Walz ticket, they understand what would be imposed on our country and what would be imposed on them, that if they actually hear it and they understand it, they would realize that their election is already over. That when people see what it is that she's trying to charge and to whom she would charge it, it's over. I mentioned to you that she doesn't have a degree in business, but some people around her do. Do I think that she sat down and came up with these policies herself? No. She's at the mercy of others, just like she's always been in every office she's ever held. More about what came out of this convention and what did not come out, and we'll talk about it straight ahead right here on WOWO, 92.3 FM and 1190 AM.
Podcasts by Federated Media.